In the autumn of 1955, a farmer in western Pennsylvania was walking his land when a groundhog led him somewhere he was never supposed to go. Under a sandstone cliff above a quiet creek, he found a hole in the earth. And inside that hole, at about 30 inches down, was a knife. A complete, perfectly made flint knife, shaped by human hands. He covered the hole back up. He told almost no one. And for 18 years, he waited for someone who would understand what he had found. What lay beneath that Pennsylvania hillside would ignite one of the longest and most bitter arguments in the history of American archaeology. It asked a question that the scientific establishment was not prepared to answer. What if the first Americans were not the people the textbooks had always described? What if someone else, someone older, someone we have never fully named, had already been here, sheltering in a Pennsylvania rock overhang, lighting fires, making tools, living and dying in a land that was supposed to be empty? This is the story of Meadowcroft Rockshelter. And it begins, as all the best stories do, with a single person who simply refused to walk away. To understand why Meadowcroft matters, you first have to understand where it sits and what it looks like, because the landscape itself tells part of the story. Drive about 30 miles southwest of Pittsburgh, into the rolling hills of Washington County, Pennsylvania, and you reach a small community called Avella. The land here is old in the way that only the Appalachian foothills can be. Forested ridges fold into one another. Creeks run cold and clear between them. The rock underneath everything is ancient sandstone, laid down hundreds of millions of years ago, brown and thick and layered like the pages of a book no one has finished reading. Cross Creek runs through this landscape, a quiet tributary of the Ohio River. And above the creek, carved by water and time into the face of a sandstone bluff, there is an overhang, not a cave exactly, a shelter. A place where the cliff reaches out over the earth and creates a dry, protected space beneath it, roughly 72 feet above the creek bed below. For thousands of years, anyone moving through this valley would have seen it immediately. A natural roof, a dry floor, a commanding view of the water below, where animals came to drink and fish moved in the shallows. It was, in the most literal sense, an ideal place to stop, to rest, to eat, to stay for a while before moving on. That is exactly what people did here. For an almost unimaginable stretch of time, generation after generation found this overhang and decided it was worth stopping at. The question that would eventually consume decades of scientific argument was not whether people had been here. The evidence for that was unmistakable. The question was simply, and explosively, when? The modern story of Meadowcroft begins not with a scientist, but with a farmer. Albert Miller was a Washington County native, a history enthusiast, and a careful, patient man. He had grown up on this land. He knew the rock overhang above Cross Creek the way you know a feature of your own backyard. Something always there, something taken for granted. But Miller had read enough local history to suspect that rock shelters like this one had been important to the native peoples who once moved through the region. He believed, quietly and without any formal training to support him, that the ground beneath that overhang might hold something worth finding. On the 12th of November 1955, curiosity finally pulled him up the hillside. He found a fresh groundhog burrow near the base of the overhang and did what any curious man might do. He reached in. Then he dug a little. At about 12 inches down, he found burnt bone and worked flint. At 30 inches, he pulled out a complete, intact flint knife, clearly made by human hands. Miller knew immediately that this was beyond him. He was a farmer, not an archaeologist, and he was afraid that if he told the wrong person or moved too quickly, the site would be damaged or taken away before anyone understood what it held. So, he covered the hole, sealed his notes, and began the long, quiet work of finding the right person to trust it to. It would take him 18 years. 18 years of careful inquiries, of letters written and meetings arranged, of guarding a secret that sat beneath his feet every single day. Most people would have given up. Albert Miller kept waiting, and in 1973, his patience finally found its match. James Adivasio was 30 years old when he took a position at the University of Pittsburgh in the early 1970s. He was young, ambitious, and freshly committed to finding archaeological sites in the greater western Pennsylvania region. He made it known around academic circles that he was looking. And through a chain of connections that he would later describe as almost accidental, he was eventually put in touch with a Washington County farmer who had something to show him. When Adavasio visited the Miller property and was handed that flint knife, he knew at once he was looking at something real. He agreed to bring a team. He had no idea what he was walking into. Excavations began in the summer of 1973, with a crew of archaeology and geology students working the site as part of a university field school. Their initial expectations were modest. Other rock shelters in the region had yielded interesting but relatively shallow deposits, rarely more than a meter deep. Adavasio anticipated something similar, perhaps some late archaic material, perhaps a few thousand years of intermittent use. Interesting, but not revolutionary. Within weeks, those expectations were gone. The deposits beneath Meadowcroft were not a meter deep. They were dramatically deeper, layered with extraordinary precision. 11 distinct strata of sediment stacked on top of one another like the floors of a building that had been quietly growing for millennia. Middle Archaic material appeared, then Early Archaic, then something older still, something that had no clear name yet because nothing quite like it had been found before in this part of the world. Adavasio kept digging. The site kept going down. And when the first radiocarbon results came back from the laboratory after the 1973 season, he sat with the numbers for a long time before he said anything to anyone. The radiocarbon dates from the lowest levels of Meadowcroft did not ease their way into the conversation. They arrived like a stone through a window. The deepest cultural material, the oldest layer showing clear evidence of human presence, dated to somewhere between 16,000 and 19,000 years before the present, not 12,000. Not 13,000, 16 to 19,000 years. In the early 1970s, when the Clovis first model still held the field like an undefeated champion, those numbers were not just surprising, they were professionally dangerous. To understand why, you have to remember what the scientific consensus looked like at that moment. The accepted story was clean and confident. The first Americans had crossed a land bridge from Siberia into Alaska near the end of the last ice age, roughly 13,000 years ago. They carried the distinctive fluted spear points, first identified near Clovis, New Mexico. They were the founding population. Everything before them was considered empty. To claim otherwise was not simply controversial. It was, to many archaeologists, essentially career suicide. Adavasio understood this perfectly. He was not reckless. He was meticulous. Before saying anything publicly, he ran the dates again and again. Over the course of the excavations, his team would eventually produce more than 50 radiocarbon dates from the site, arranged across all 11 strata. Crucially, those dates lined up in precise stratigraphic order, oldest at the bottom, youngest at the top, with no significant reversals. That internal consistency was not the signature of contamination or error. It was the signature of a site that had been deposited carefully, naturally, and honestly across an enormous span of time. The numbers were real. The only question now was whether anyone in the scientific world was willing to believe them. The dates alone would have been enough to make Meadowcroft one of the most discussed sites in American archaeology. But the dates were only part of the story. What the team actually pulled from the earth beneath that Pennsylvania overhang was extraordinary in its own right. Over the course of excavations that ran intensively from 1973 through 1979 and continued periodically in the decades that followed, more than 20,000 artifacts were recovered from Meadowcroft. Not fragments of possibility, not ambiguous broken stones that might or might not be tools. Actual, unambiguous evidence of human life, carefully made and clearly used. Among the most significant was a small, elegant projectile point found in the deepest cultural layer. It was unlike any previously documented point type in North America. Unfluted, lanceolate in shape, thinned precisely at the base for hafting, it represented a technology that predated and differed fundamentally from the Clovis tradition. Ottavasio and his team named it the Miller-Lancelate Projectile Point, in honor of the farmer who had guarded the site for 18 years. It was the oldest arrowhead ever found on the continent. Deeper still, in the most ancient deposits, the team recovered the Mungai knife, a bifacially worked cutting tool that the Smithsonian Institution later confirmed through radiocarbon dating to be approximately 16,000 years old. It remains among the oldest confirmed artifacts ever found in North America. But the collection extended far beyond stone. Researchers recovered worked bone, fragments of woven basketry, pottery from later periods, and the remains of hundreds of plant and animal species. More than 950,000 animal bone fragments and over 1.4 million plant remains were cataloged from the site, painting a remarkably detailed picture of how people lived here, season after season, millennium after millennium. The scientific community did not receive Ottavasio's findings with open arms. It received them the way an institution receives any claim that threatens to dismantle what it has spent decades building, with suspicion, with force, and with a particular kind of professional coldness that can be more damaging than outright hostility. The criticism came from multiple directions at once, and some of it was serious and worth taking seriously. The most persistent objections centered on the radiocarbon dates themselves. Meadowcroft sits in coal country. Beneath the rock shelter, ancient coal seams run through the bedrock. Critics argued that groundwater percolating down through those seams could have carried old carbon into the sediment, contaminating the samples and producing dates that were artificially ancient. If dead carbon from coal had seeped into the charcoal Ottavasio was testing, the ages would read far older than they actually were. It was a legitimate methodological concern, and it would follow Meadowcroft for decades. A second line of attack focused on the flora and fauna recovered from the site's deepest levels. Critics noted that the animal bones found alongside the oldest artifacts did not include the kinds of extinct Pleistocene megafauna, the mammoths, mastodons, and giant ground sloths, that you would expect to find if people had truly been living here during the height of the last ice age. The plants recovered from those levels looked more like species from a warmer period than from a landscape locked under glacial cold. To skeptics, this ecological mismatch suggested that the dates and the deposits did not belong together, that something in the stratigraphy had gone wrong. James Mead and C. Vance Haynes, two respected voices in American archaeology, became the most persistent and public critics. They were not cranks. They were careful scientists, asking hard questions. And Ottavasio would have to answer every single one of them. Ottavasio did not retreat. He was not built for retreat. Over the years that followed the initial controversy, he and his team mounted one of the most thorough and methodically documented defenses in the history of American archaeological science. They did not simply repeat their original claims. They went back to the evidence, layer by layer, and answered every objection with data. On the contamination question, Ottavasio's response was precise and devastating. He pointed to the 52 radiocarbon dates his team had produced from Meadowcroft, spanning all 11 strata of the site. Those dates were not scattered or inconsistent. They were in perfect stratigraphic order, oldest at the bottom and youngest at the top, with only minor and inconsequential reversals in the uppermost levels. Contamination from coal seam groundwater, he argued, does not produce that kind of orderly, internally consistent chronology. Contamination produces chaos. What Meadowcroft produced was the opposite. He went further. To address the contamination concern directly and permanently, Ottavasio sought independent verification from one of the most respected radiocarbon laboratories in the world. Oxford University conducted accelerator mass spectrometry dating on samples from the site. Their results aligned with Ottavasio's original chronology. The dates held. On the ecological objection, he offered a straightforward explanation. Meadowcroft, he argued, sat at the southern edge of the glacial front during the height of the last ice age. The climate at that specific location, sheltered in a river valley and positioned well below the ice margin, may have been significantly warmer than the surrounding region. A refugium of sorts, a pocket of relatively mild conditions that would explain exactly the plant and animal species his team had found. The critics grew quieter. Not silent, but quieter. And the tide, almost imperceptibly, began to turn. Before I show you the last part, if you want to look at your own results and see where Meadowcroft, Rockshelter, and the pre-Clovis people fit into your bloodline, I put a full 3-volume PDF bundle over at the Origin DNA website. It shows you how to read your raw data and find matches beyond what Ancestry or 2, 3, and Me tell you. Link is in the description. But stay right here, because what comes next is the part most people completely miss. Because while Adavasio was fighting his battles in academic journals and conference rooms, something quietly remarkable was happening in the broader world of archaeology. Other sites were emerging, one by one, in places as far apart as coastal Chile, coastal Virginia, and the frozen Yukon. Excavations were turning up evidence of human presence that predated Clovis. And each time a new pre-Clovis site was announced, the researchers involved pointed to the same place as their intellectual precedent. They pointed to Meadowcroft. Adavasio had not simply defended one site. He had established the standard. His rigorous, painstaking methodology at Meadowcroft, the careful stratigraphy, the exhaustive radiocarbon program, the detailed artifact documentation, became the template that every subsequent pre-Clovis claim was measured against. When Monte Verde in Chile was confirmed as a legitimate pre-Clovis site in 1997, pushing the American timeline back beyond 14,000 years, the Clovis first model finally cracked open for good. And the crack ran directly back to a rock overhang in western Pennsylvania. Meadowcroft had not been a footnote. It had been the foundation. The site that took every punch the establishment could throw, stayed on its feet, and quietly made room for the truth that the rest of the evidence was building toward. Most archaeological sites tell a single chapter of the human story. A kill site where hunters brought down a mammoth 15,000 years ago. A village occupied for a few centuries before its people moved on. A burial ground used across a handful of generations. These are valuable, these are important, but they are snapshots. Meadowcroft is something entirely different. Meadowcroft is the whole book. What makes this Pennsylvania rock shelter unlike almost any other site in North America is not just the age of its oldest deposits. It is the unbroken continuity of human presence that stretches from those ancient beginnings all the way forward through time. From the earliest pre-Clovis visitors who sheltered here during the last ice age, through the Paleo-Indian hunters who followed the great herds across the Allegheny Plateau, through the archaic foragers who gathered plants and fished the creek below, through the woodland peoples who brought pottery and ceremony, all the way to the Monongahela culture villages of the 16th century and the European settlers who came after them, Meadowcroft was never fully abandoned. Native peoples occupied and returned to the site until approximately 700 years ago. It saw occasional use through the 18th century. The Miller family farmed the land above it beginning in 1795. Local teenagers, entirely unaware of what lay beneath their feet, explored the overhang in the 1970s, while Adavasio's team was excavating directly below them. No other site in the United States has produced a stratified cultural sequence of comparable length. 11 distinct strata, thousands of years of returned footsteps, generation after generation of people who looked up at that sandstone overhang above Cross Creek and made the same simple ancient decision. This place is good. We will stop here. We will rest. And we will come back. History does not always move quickly in science, but it does eventually move. For nearly 2 decades after Adavasio first published his dates, Meadowcroft existed in a kind of uncomfortable middle ground, too well documented to dismiss, too controversial to fully embrace. The Clovis First camp never retracted its objections, but it also never managed to produce the definitive counter-evidence that would have closed the argument for good. And slowly, as the 1980s gave way to the 1990s, the ground beneath the debate began to shift. Monte Verde, a waterlogged site in southern Chile, was confirmed in 1997 as a legitimate pre-Clovis occupation dating to at least 14,600 years ago. Its lead excavator, Tom Dillahay, had faced the same wall of skepticism that Adavasio knew so well. When a panel of the most respected archaeologists in the field visited Monteverde and came away convinced, it sent a signal that the establishment could no longer ignore. If people were in southern Chile 14,600 years ago, they had to have passed through North America earlier still. The math demanded it. And suddenly, Meadowcroft's dates did not seem quite so impossible. Other sites followed. Cactus Hill in Virginia, Page Ladson in Florida. Each one added another voice to a chorus that had been building quietly and stubbornly since 1973. In 2005, the United States Secretary of the Interior designated Meadowcroft Rockshelter a National Historic Landmark. The official statement of significance declared plainly that the site had demonstrated human presence in the Americas since at least 16,000 years before the present, and that it had revolutionized how archaeologists view the peopling of the New World. It was not a full apology. Science rarely offers those, but it was something close to one. There is a particular kind of courage in what Albert Miller did. Not the dramatic courage of someone who storms into a fight, but the quiet, stubborn courage of a man who finds something extraordinary and simply refuses to let it disappear. He covered that groundhog hole. He kept his notes. He waited 18 years for the right person. And because he did, we know something today that we would not otherwise know. We were here longer than anyone told us. The first Americans did not arrive at a single moment, crossing a single bridge, carrying a single kind of spear point. They came in waves, and some of those waves broke against the shores of this continent far earlier than the textbooks have ever been comfortable saying. Meadowcroft does not answer every question about who those people were or exactly how they got here, but it holds open the door. It insists that the question is worth asking. Somewhere beneath that sandstone overhang in western Pennsylvania, the fires of the oldest known Americans once burned. The smoke rose into the rock above and left a dark stain that lasted 19,000 years. It is still there, waiting, like Albert Miller waited, for the rest of us to finally catch up.
Thanks for watching this video, but before you go, don't let your DNA results just sit there unanswered. Tap the link on the description to download your ebook and find out what your raw data is hiding.